I was sitting at my kitchen counter on a Tuesday afternoon, just wrapping up some emails for work, when my phone buzzed with a Venmo notification. Request, $2,800, Liam's party. I blinked. $2,800? I hadn't heard anything about a party. And Liam, my nephew, was turning 7. I figured they'd do a little backyard thing like usual. I opened the app and saw the request was from my sister-in-law, Tanya. I texted her, "Hey, just saw your Venmo request. What's this for?" She responded within minutes. "Oh, the birthday party. At the Vineyard event space. We locked in the caterer, magician, pony rides, and all that. Your brother said you'd cover it. We figured it was easier to just send the request." I read that message at least 3 times, my stomach tightening with every word. I hadn't offered to pay for Liam's birthday party. I hadn't even been told it was happening. And now they were sending me an invoice like I was the family ATM. I called my brother, Matt. He picked up on the second ring. Matt sounded cheerful. "Hey sis, Tanya said she messaged you. Thanks for taking care of it seriously. You always save the day." I was quiet for a second before answering. "Matt? I didn't agree to this. No one asked me. You just assumed I'd pay?" Matt chuckled like I was being dramatic. "Come on, you've always helped out. You don't have kids, and it's just a birthday. What's the big deal?" I kept my tone steady. "It's the principle. You planned a $2,800 event and decided I'd cover it without asking. That's not help. That's manipulation." Matt scoffed. "You're overreacting. Tanya and I are stretched thin right now. It's not like you can't afford it." And there it was. Because I had a good job, no children, and a nice house, that somehow gave everyone the green light to put their hands in my pockets without permission. Still on the phone with Matt, I said slowly, "Matt, I don't mind helping. I never have. But you didn't even ask me. You just handed me the bill like it was my job." Matt's tone shifted. Defensive now. "We're family. Isn't that what family does?" I didn't answer right away. I was staring out the kitchen window, watching a neighbor water her plants, wondering how normal it must feel to have boundaries that were respected. Then I said, "Helping is when I choose to say yes. This is you deciding for me." Matt sighed, clearly annoyed. "You're blowing this out of proportion. It's for Liam. Don't make it about yourself." I hung up without saying another word. 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed again, this time from my mom. I knew what was coming, but I answered anyway. My mom didn't waste time. "Why are you making such a fuss over a little money?" I said. "Because no one asked me, Mom." Her voice sharpened. "You're doing just fine. It's not like you needed that money for anything urgent." I replied, "It doesn't matter what I needed it for. You don't just assign someone a bill." Mom huffed. "Honestly, sometimes I think you forget what it means to be part of a family. You've always been cold." That hit harder than I expected. Cold. That word had chased me since childhood, just because I wasn't loud or needy or dramatic like Matt and Tanya. I was quiet. I worked hard. I handled things. And somehow, that made me less worthy of consideration. I responded, "Maybe I've been quiet because every time I speak, I'm told I'm selfish." My mom said, "Well, you're not a mother. You wouldn't understand what it's like to want your child to have something special." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're right, Mom. I'm not a mother. But I'm also not a fool." After the call ended, I sat there in silence. Not angry, just tired. Tired of being expected to say yes before anyone even thought to ask. Tired of having to justify why I deserved agency over my own money, time, and presence. I opened the Venmo app and declined the request. Then I sent a single-line message to Tanya. "Please don't send me payment requests for things I didn't agree to." She replied almost immediately, "Wait, are you not paying? Everything's already booked." I didn't respond. 15 minutes later, Matt texted again. "Seriously? You're pulling out now?" Still, I said nothing. And then the kicker, my mom again. "This is incredibly petty. You're punishing your nephew over your pride. Don't expect us to cover it. We don't have that kind of money lying around. That made me pause. Because of course they didn't. That's why they had always leaned on me. Birthday gifts, last-minute rent gaps, holiday plane tickets. I'd covered all of it, quietly, without fanfare, because it felt like the right thing to do. But this wasn't about generosity. This was about entitlement. And what burned wasn't just the assumption. They planned the whole party knowing I'd fund it. No backup plan, no conversation. Just a price tag and my name on the invisible line. I stared at my phone, at the series of messages piling up in my family group chat. Dad sending a thumbs up, my aunt chiming in. She's always been difficult. I stood up, set the phone face down on the counter, and poured myself a glass of wine. If I was going to be called difficult, I might as well earn it. That night, I opened my laptop, looked over the payment details from the event planner Tanya had mentioned, and started making a few quiet moves of my own. The invoice had been emailed to Tanya, but the planner's name and number were included at the bottom. I drafted a polite message. Hi, I'm not financially involved with this event. Please update your records accordingly. All future correspondence should go through the hosts directly. Thank you. The next morning, I received a reply from the planner confirming the update. Just like that, I was no longer responsible. I didn't tell anyone in the family. I let the silence speak for me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel obligated to smooth it over. No group chat explanations, no passive-aggressive texts, no guilt-filled apologies, just stillness. By the weekend, I'd blocked the group notifications. I took a long walk through the park, stopped for coffee, and bought myself a new journal. Something about the clean pages felt symbolic. That night, I wrote a single sentence on the first page. I am not their backup plan. I underlined it twice, because it wasn't about the $2,800. It was about how easily they'd all decided I didn't need a choice. That I existed to fund their wants, their gaps, their messes. Not anymore. They had their party. And now, I was going to have something too. But it wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be petty, it would be quiet, firm, unshakable, and it would begin with one word: no. I didn't become the responsible one by accident. Growing up, it was obvious from the beginning. Matt was the star, the golden boy. He could crash a bike into a neighbor's car and get a hug for being adventurous. I, on the other hand, had to color inside the lines, literally and figuratively, or risk being labeled dramatic, difficult, or cold. When I got good grades, no one clapped. When I got into a top-tier university on scholarship, my parents' reaction was, "That's nice. Will you be close enough to come home for holidays?" Meanwhile, when Matt dropped out of community college 2 semesters in, my mother cried about how the system wasn't made for boys like him. He burned through 3 jobs in 2 years, accumulated $16,000 in credit card debt by 23. Every time I watched my parents cover for him, pay off the bills, call in favors, and every time they'd say something like, "He's trying his best." When I landed my first job in tech, they asked if I could help cover Matt's rent for a few months while he got back on his feet. That few months turned into a year and a half. I covered it quietly, because I thought it would earn me their respect, or at least their attention. It didn't. Then came the holidays. Every Christmas I'd fly home, on my own dime, lugging carefully wrapped gifts for everyone, including Matt's kids. He and Tanya never brought anything. My mother would pull me aside and say, "Don't make a big deal out of it. They're doing their best." At Thanksgiving, I paid for the entire meal 4 years in a row. Groceries, wine, pies, everything. I'd show up early to cook, clean, set the table, while Matt would stumble in 2 hours late and still get thanked for making time. And every time I tried to step back, even slightly, I'd get guilt-tripped. The worst part? I let it happen, over and over, because somewhere deep down I believed if I just kept giving, one day they'd finally see me, finally say thank you, finally treat me like more than the person who kept the lights on. That day never came, Even the emergency fund was my idea. After Dad had a health scare, I offered to set up a shared account, strictly for real family emergencies. I funded it entirely. My parents praised the idea. Matt thanked me profusely. They said it was smart and generous. That was the same fund Tanya pulled from without asking, to pay for pony rides and vineyard brunches for a 7-year-old's birthday. What stung wasn't just the money, it was the confirmation of something I'd been too afraid to admit. It was never about fairness. It was about access. And I was the only one ever expected to pay. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being the reliable one, not the favorite, not the black sheep. Just the person everyone knows will quietly clean up after them, emotionally, financially, logistically. At work, I was thriving. I had earned 2 promotions in 5 years, led national projects, mentored younger women in tech. But when I'd bring it up at home, Matt would roll his eyes and say, "So basically, you're just one of those overpaid email people." My dad once told me, "It's good that your job keeps you busy. Some of us have real stress." They acted like money just appeared in my account every month, like success was effortless for me. But I worked for everything I had. Long hours, late nights, tears behind closed doors. I once told Tanya I was thinking of taking a solo trip to Italy. She laughed. "That's cute. But you know Matt and I can't travel unless someone watches the kids. Maybe just plan a beach weekend instead and come hang with us?" So I did. I canceled my dream trip and booked a rental house 3 hours from home to play host for a long weekend. I paid for groceries, cooked all the meals, cleaned up after everyone. They left without even saying thank you. I never brought it up, just swallowed it like always. But after the birthday party stunt, something in me snapped. Not loudly, but cleanly. I realized I'd been waiting for permission to set boundaries, waiting for someone else to notice I was exhausted. That permission was never coming, and the only person who could protect me was me. I stopped checking the family group chat, turned off notifications. I started journaling at night, something I hadn't done since high school. I wrote down every moment I'd stayed quiet to keep the peace. Every time I paid instead of pushing back. Every time I said, "It's okay," when it really wasn't. And as I wrote, something strange happened. I didn't feel angry. I felt free. I made a list titled, "What I Owe," and underneath it, I wrote one word, myself. That Friday, I went to my favorite bookstore and picked up a novel I'd been eyeing for months. I got takeout from the sushi place I always passed on the way home. I lit a candle, put on a record, ate slowly, alone, peacefully. It wasn't a grand rebellion, it was a reclamation. A few days later, Tanya sent me a text. "Just so you know, we already sent the invites. Would be really embarrassing if we had to cancel." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I turned off my phone again and went for a walk. The path ahead of me was quiet. And for once, it felt like it belonged entirely to me. Because I wasn't going to explain myself anymore. I wasn't going to ask for understanding. They had made their assumptions. And now I was going to make my own decision. Not out of spite, but out of survival. I didn't cancel the party. Not directly. I didn't call anyone, make a scene, or threaten to ruin anything. I just made sure they had to handle it without me. Because the truth was, the whole thing, venue, caterer, rentals, was already under my name. Booked with my email, paid with my cards, protected by my cancellation policies. All I did was log into each account and press cancel. The $12,800 never left my account. The caterer was relieved. Apparently Tanya had missed 2 deadlines and changed the menu 4 times. The magician had already booked another event for that day and refunded the deposit. The vineyard was polite. They said they hoped to work with me again someday. It was done in less than an hour. No fanfare, no confrontation. Then I wrote in the group chat, "Since I'm the one who's doing fine, I'm sure you'll all manage just fine without me. The party is canceled. Good luck." The reaction was instant. Matt texted, "You canceled everything? Without talking to us?" Tanya messaged, "Are you kidding me? The invites already went out. People made plans." My mother wrote, "I cannot believe you're doing this to your own nephew. This is petty and cruel." I didn't respond. They kept texting, calling, flooding my inbox like a dam had burst. Accusations piled in. I was being dramatic, punishing a child, making everything about myself. Matt added another message. "You really let everyone down. This was about Liam, not you." That one stung. Not because it was true, it wasn't, but because it summed up exactly how they saw me. A resource, a wallet with feelings they didn't need to consider. I almost replied. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but instead I locked my phone, stood up, and opened my laptop. That afternoon, I booked myself a solo trip. Oceanfront suite, full spa package, the kind of trip I used to only dream about while hosting their chaos. When I got there, I turned off my phone for the first 2 days. And I breathed. For once, I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval. The resort had a balcony that overlooked the sea. On the third morning, I sipped my coffee and watched the sun rise without once checking my notifications. That kind of peace? It was addictive. I read 2 novels in 5 days. I got a massage. I ordered room service without justifying the cost to anyone. I didn't apologize for the silence. I didn't explain the boundaries. I just lived inside them. Back home, I knew the group chat must have imploded. Tanya would have posted vague complaints on Facebook. Matt would have told relatives I was unstable or going through something. My mom, no doubt, played victim. I didn't care. One day, I checked my email out of curiosity. There were 3 messages from the event planner. One was a forwarded email from Tanya demanding the event still go through, accusing the planner of unprofessionalism. Another was from the venue, stating again that the client of record, me, had full authority to cancel, and the refund had already been processed. The final email simply said, "Just wanted to thank you for handling things with class. Not everyone would." I smiled. Class. That was the word no one in my family had ever used about me. Dramatic, cold, selfish, sure, but never classy. And now I was building a life where I didn't need to ask for it. When I returned home, I let a full day pass before turning my phone back on. Dozens of missed calls, voicemails, messages from extended family I hadn't heard from in years. Rachel texted, "Hey, just checking in. Your mom said you had a breakdown or something?" A breakdown. I didn't reply. I didn't clarify. Let them make up whatever story they needed. I had finally stopped offering footnotes to my own choices. Later that evening, my mother called again. I answered, mostly out of curiosity. My mother said on the phone, "You made us look like fools." I replied, "No, I just refuse to let you keep using me." She said sharply, "You embarrassed your brother in front of everyone." I told her, "He embarrassed himself. He planned a party with my money before asking if I was even okay with it." She snapped, "It was for Liam. You could have been graceful about it." I answered calmly, "I was. Graceful doesn't mean silent. It means handling something without cruelty, which is what I did." There was a long pause. She muttered, "I don't know who you think you are lately." I said, "Someone with boundaries. Finally." Then I hung up. I looked around my living room, clean, quiet, and mine. There was a book waiting on the couch, a playlist humming softly from the speaker, and a scented candle burning low. This was my space now. My family didn't implode because I withheld money. They imploded because they had built everything around the assumption I'd never say no. Now I had, and I didn't regret it for a second. That night, I found an old photo album tucked into the bookshelf, one from a trip we took when I was a teenager. I flipped through the pages, remembering how even then I had paid for part of the trip with my babysitting money. Matt had forgotten his wallet, and Mom just looked at me and said, "Can't you cover it? He'll pay you back." He never did. Looking at those pictures, I could see the difference in my eyes. Back then, I was still trying, still hoping that if I did enough, gave enough, smiled enough, they'd notice. They didn't. And now, I wasn't waiting. I took the album, closed it gently, and slid it back onto the shelf. It wasn't bitterness I felt, it was closure. This wasn't about punishing them, it was about choosing me. Choosing peace over performance. Choosing solitude over manipulation. Choosing to believe I was more than what they wanted to take. That's what people never tell you about boundaries. They don't just protect you from others, they return you to yourself. The following weekend, I treated myself to something I hadn't done in years, a pottery class. I used to love creating with my hands before life became a constant performance for people who never clapped. There were 6 of us in the studio. No one knew me. No one expected anything. The instructor smiled warmly and said, "This is your time. Just enjoy it." I shaped clay slowly, letting go of perfection. My first bowl wobbled, my second collapsed, my third held together. It was imperfect and small, but it was mine. I brought it home, placed it on my bookshelf next to the old photo album, not to forget the past, but to mark how far I'd come from it. Tanya texted one final time, "Hope you're proud of yourself. Liam's party was a disaster." I stared at it for a long time. Then I deleted it. I didn't need to respond. I didn't need to argue. Because here's the thing, when you stop giving what was never appreciated, people don't just notice, they panic. But I wasn't panicking anymore. I was done being their safety net. And I was just getting started being my own sanctuary. It took 2 weeks before the tone began to change. First, a message from my Aunt Marla. "I didn't realize the party money was coming entirely from you. That's not what your mom told us." Then another from my cousin Dana. "Honestly, I would have done the same thing. You've been too generous for too long." Even my father, who usually kept quiet, more observer than participant, sent a short message that simply read, "I'm sorry. I should have spoken up sooner. That wasn't fair to you." They were starting to get it, or at least they realized something had shifted. But it wasn't because they'd grown, it was because they'd lost their shortcut. My mother didn't apologize. She sent me a long message, one of those rambling, self-justifying essays disguised as reconciliation. It started with, "You know I've always loved you," and ended with, "But what you did was extreme, and you owe Liam an apology." Not one word about the assumption they made. Not one word about the way they decided my money, my time, my labor was just available, without question. I didn't reply. Matt tried next. He sent a meme about family being messy but worth it, followed by, "You've made your point. Can we move on?" Tanya messaged, "I know we didn't handle things great, but you're punishing the whole family now. Don't you think that's a bit much?" Their words weren't about remorse. They were about restoring access. And once you realize that about certain people, it becomes very easy to stay silent. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. Just aware. The kind of awareness that doesn't rage or cry. The kind that breathes and moves on, and stops looking over its shoulder for approval that will never come. Friends, real friends, notice the difference. My coworker Sonal said during lunch, "You look lighter, like something heavy finally got put down." I told her, "It did." My therapist smiled during our next session. "How does it feel to say no?" "Like I'm finally living in my own skin," I said. It wasn't just the family I was distancing from, it was the roles they had assigned me. The responsible one, the helper, the invisible support beam in a house built to glorify everyone else. I wasn't trying to destroy the house. I just walked out the front door and built something of my own. They noticed, of course. My mother sent another message a week later. This time she tried a softer tone. She wrote, "I miss you. I don't like how we left things. Maybe we can talk? Just us?" I read it twice, and I felt nothing. No anger, no joy, no panic, just space. Room to think clearly. That message would have broken me 5 years ago. It would have had me apologizing for things I didn't do, just to restore peace. But now? Now it was just text on a screen. I didn't need to be cruel. I just didn't need to respond. A few days later, I saw Tanya had posted again. Another vague quote about entitled family members and people who think money makes them better. I didn't comment. But what struck me wasn't the post. It was the backdrop. No wine tours, no catered brunches, no custom balloon arches for Liam. Just a cheap folding table and a homemade cake. There was no party. Just a photo of her and Matt, looking worn out. The caption read, "Doing what we can with what we've got. Real family shows up." For the first time, I understood something I hadn't before. They weren't mad because I abandoned them. They were mad because I stopped performing. I stopped cushioning their mistakes. I stopped carrying their burdens. I stopped pretending that being needed was the same thing as being loved. And without that illusion, they were just people, scrambling to replace what they took for granted. I shut my laptop. That night, I lit a candle. I made a warm meal. I read until midnight. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was earned. Later that week, I visited the park I used to walk through after work, back when things felt heavier. I sat on the same bench I used to cry on, back when I was still covering bills I couldn't afford, apologizing for boundaries I hadn't yet built, just trying to feel like I mattered. It was the first time I sat there without that tightness in my chest. I watched a father chasing his daughter through the grass, both laughing, their joy simple and unperformed. I realized how much of my life had been shaped by performance, of being good, generous, understanding, but none of that ever made them love me more. And now that I wasn't playing that role, they didn't love me less. They just noticed the absence of what they never appreciated. That realization filled me with something I hadn't expected: relief. I didn't need to rebuild the old script. I could write something new. That evening, I went home and journaled for an hour. Not about them, but about who I was becoming. Someone who could walk away without slamming the door. Someone who could hold silence without using it as a weapon. Someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone to finally feel free. On Sunday, my friend Candace invited me to brunch with her family. I hesitated at first. Group still made me a little wary, but I said yes. Her parents greeted me like I mattered. Her brother pulled out a chair. They asked questions and actually listened to the answers. Halfway through the meal, her mom said, "You seem like someone who's been through a lot, but you still show up soft. That's rare." I smiled. Because I realized she was right. I had learned to be soft without letting people walk all over me. I had learned that forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation, and that sometimes the best way to love yourself is to walk away from the version of you that never said no. When I got home, I took my phone off silent. There was one more message from my mother. It simply read, "We miss you." I read it, breathed in slowly, and let it sit. I didn't delete it. I didn't respond. I just stood in my own home, grounded in my own peace, finally okay with not needing to be needed. And in that stillness, I realized something powerful. The day they came around didn't change me. It only proved I never needed them to. Months passed. They didn't try again. Not really. A few birthday texts, a tagged photo here and there, a holiday email that included me more out of obligation than warmth. And honestly, that was fine. Because in the space they left behind, I had built something new. My circle wasn't big, but it was solid. Candace, Sonal, a couple of friends from my book club, people who didn't expect me to perform, produce, or apologize for existing. I spent weekends on solo hikes, cooking new recipes, taking classes I had put off for years. I even started therapy again, this time, not for crisis, but for growth. I wasn't chasing a version of me they would love. I was becoming the version I loved. One Saturday morning, I found an old family photo while reorganizing a drawer. It was from a vacation years ago, one I had paid for, of course. My parents were smiling. Matt had his arm slung over my shoulder. Tanya was holding Liam, who was still a baby then. And there I was, in the middle, half smiling, half forgotten. I looked at that photo for a long time, not with sadness, but with clarity. I hadn't been a victim. I had been a volunteer, volunteering my time, my money, my love to a system that never reciprocated. And now that I had withdrawn my participation, it wasn't that the family had collapsed. It just returned to what it always was: a performance. One I no longer auditioned for. That day, I put the photo in an envelope and tucked it away in the back of the closet. Not out of anger, but because it no longer needed to be on display. It had served its purpose. It reminded me how far I'd come. A few weeks later, I hosted a small dinner at my place. Just a few friends, candles glowing, a playlist humming in the background. Candace brought wine. Sonal brought a pie she'd made from scratch. We laughed until our stomachs hurt, talked about things that mattered, and no one interrupted to shift the spotlight. At one point, Candace raised her glass and said, "To boundaries." I smiled and answered, "To peace." We clinked glasses. There were no fireworks, no dramatic apologies, no sweeping declarations from my family, just a quiet, steady kind of joy. That was what made it real. I wasn't thriving to prove anything. I wasn't healing for their benefit. I wasn't quietly hoping they'd come around and suddenly see my worth, because I already saw it, and it was more than enough. One afternoon, while walking through a local art market, I passed a vendor selling handmade journals. I stopped to flip through one with a soft leather cover and thick, cream-colored pages. On the inside cover, there was a quote printed in gold: "Sometimes the biggest rescue is saving yourself." I bought it. That night, I sat on my balcony and opened to the first page. I wrote about the party that never happened, about the years I'd spent waiting for people to meet me halfway, about how tired I'd become, constantly performing usefulness in a family that treated my love like a service. And then I wrote something that surprised me. I forgive them, but I don't invite them back. That single line lifted something from my chest. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't for them. It was the final gift I gave myself. The closing of a chapter that no longer deserved rewrites. I started writing more, every evening, not to explain or to justify, but to honor the parts of me that no longer needed defending. The girl who used to cry in her car after family dinners. The young woman who bought holiday gifts with money she didn't have. The version of me who thought being useful was the only way to be loved. They were all versions that brought me here, and I was grateful to every single one of them for surviving long enough to create someone who finally knew her worth. In the months that followed, I started building traditions of my own. Every first Sunday of the month, I hosted brunch with friends. No obligations, just a potluck of comfort food, mismatched plates, and laughter that made my cheeks hurt. I called it Chosen Family Sunday, and every time I sent out an invite, I felt a quiet sense of pride. Not because I had people to gather, but because I finally knew how to choose the right ones. I started traveling again, solo trips to cities I'd once dreamed about but never felt justified taking. Paris in spring, Kyoto in fall, Lisbon at sunset. Each trip reminded me of how much of the world there is to experience when you're not stuck proving your worth to people who refuse to see it. Eventually, I stopped checking their social media altogether. What were they doing? Who was still talking about me? It didn't matter. What mattered was this. I was no longer shrinking myself to make others comfortable. I was no longer funding the illusion of closeness. I had stopped being their safety net. And in its place, I'd become something I never thought possible: free. One evening, almost a year after I'd canceled that party, I found myself standing in front of a mirror, no makeup, hair pulled back, wearing a threadbare old t-shirt I'd never wear outside. And I smiled, not because I looked glamorous, but because I looked like myself. There was no audience to impress, no parental approval to win, no narrative to fix. Just me. I thought about that dinner, about the word loser being whispered behind my back by people I once would have bent over backwards to impress. And I laughed, quietly, not bitter, not smug, just Amused by how small those voices had become, I poured a cup of tea, curled up on the couch, and started planning my next solo trip. Greece, maybe. Or Morocco. Somewhere with colors and light and food I'd never tasted. As I browsed flights, a message pinged onto my screen. It was from my mother. It simply said, "Are you happy?" I stared at it, and I realized she wasn't asking for a conversation. She was asking for a window into a life she no longer had access to. I didn't reply, not out of cruelty, but because some questions deserved to echo in silence. She would never really understand the answer. But I did. I was more than happy. I was whole.